The Penguins' stated goal is to get younger. But are there two players who are in their mid-20s they should get rid of? We're going to talk about that and more right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Thursday edition of Locked On Penguins. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp. You can follow me across all social media platforms at synonym for wet. Joined as always by the one and only Hunter Hodes. You can follow him on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can give our show's Twitter account a follow at LO_Penguins. And of course, as always, we appreciate you making us part of your daily routine because we are your team every day. Don't forget that we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube and the Roku channel. Also, if you're following us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that notification button. That way you can be among the first to know when we drop our daily Monday through Friday episodes. Before we get going, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if their first $5 bet wins. Joining us once again, I'd say she's elevated to one of the best friends of the show. Kelsey Surmacz from the Hockey News is here because we've got to talk about a piece that she dropped earlier this week about two of the Penguins' pending RFAs. And we will get into that piece in our second segment, as well as an RFA the Penguins probably should target. We'll do all that later on in the show. But before we get into that, let's actually talk about the two players that we are referring to in Conor Timmins and Conor Dewar, the two Conors, if you will. This will be part of our season review series. So before we jump into it, Kelsey, welcome back. Always happy to have you.
Always a pleasure to come back here. So thanks for continuing to invite me. This is fun.
It is always a blast. And the two players, obviously, I brought them up, Conor Timmins and Conor Dewar, both of them acquired at the trade deadline for nothing but a 2025 fifth round pick from the Toronto Maple Leafs. And they were very surprising considering that they were basically buried with the Toronto Maple Leafs, deeper team, not a lot of room on the roster for either of them. Kyle Dubas, obviously a pretty big fan of both. Quickly, before I let you guys talk about Conor Dewar and Conor Timmins, let's talk about the stats real quick. Conor Timmins, 17 games with the Penguins, 1 goal, 6 assists for 7 points, and a very impressive +9. Conor Dewar, he played 17 games as well, 4 goals, 3 assists for 7 points. Some depth that when you parse it out throughout an 82-game season, they looked like they would have been pretty productive bottom 6 forwards for the Penguins. But Hunter, I pose this to you. Your thoughts on those two, on what they did for the Penguins and what their outlook for the future is.
Yeah, I thought they were totally solid. I kept making the comp that Conor Timmins is kind of like a Ben Lovejoy, where he's very steady in his own zone, can bring you a little bit of offense. He's never really caught in transition too much, making the wrong read. He's just a very steady player on the ice. That was the word I also kept coming back to, Pat. It was just steady. That's how he played down the stretch. And you look at some of the underlyings as well. Only a 17-game sample, but after 51 games with the Maple Leafs this year, his shot attempts per 60 rate went up from 49.3% to basically 58% with the Penguins. You look at his goals for rate. He was +4 with the Penguins, +5 with the Maple Leafs. His expected goal share went up from 50% with the Leafs to 55% with the Penguins. Scoring chances for it rate went up from 49% to a whopping 58.5%. And then his high danger chances for rate went up from 50 to 51. So not as much difference there, but with a couple of stats, it was night and day compared to his time in Toronto. And yes, people, very small sample, but he showed to me that he can be a capable player in this defensive group next season. If they do want to bring him back, I give him at least a solid, if I don't want to, it's 17 games. I guess if I want to do a letter grade, I'll do a solid A- to B, because I felt like he was really good down the stretch. And then for Conor Dewar, I kept saying it on the show too. He's a feisty little fella. I felt like he was one of their better forecheckers down the stretch. He had no goals this season before potting 4 with the Penguins. He was always going to the net, very greasy player, really good job of cycling down low as well. So I liked him. I felt like he was a good fit in the bottom six. And if they bring them back, I'm not going to be too upset. But Kelsey, this is where I hand this over to you. You kind of wrote in your piece that you really wouldn't bring them back for next season. Why is that? Because I felt like the what they showed, I was like, I'm totally fine with them bringing both players back. It probably is not going to be that expensive, probably not going to be that much term, probably a 2-year deal for both. But I just want to get your thoughts on their seasons and just your stance.
Well, first of all, I mean, I agree on all fronts with you about both Timmins and Dewar. They were just really solid players for the Penguins. And, especially when you look at that +9 for Timmins, if a blue liner has a plus stat next to their, on their stat line for the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're probably doing something good. Because that wasn't a very common occurrence this past season. Pretty much everybody was in the minuses. So I don't typically read into plus minus too much, but I think that's kind of a testament to the situations that Timmins was put in. There were times he was playing top 4 minutes, especially in the absence of Marcus Pettersson. We saw Karlsson play on his offside. Didn't do too shabby with Karlsson. So, I mean, overall, pretty solid body of work in that short sample size for Timmins. And then as far as Dewar, I mean, he had 3 points with the Maple Leafs all season long before coming to Pittsburgh. All of a sudden, he registers 7 points, including 4 goals, in those 17 games. So it's hard not to say that these guys impress in a short sample. All Dubas gave up was a 5th-round pick for them. So, I mean, it's not like they threw anything to go get these guys, anything of significance. But just to kind of turn things a little bit, I think the reason I'm looking at this roster and I'm thinking that you don't bring these guys back is purely from a development standpoint. The Penguins have a lot of forwards that are, kind of placeholder guys already on their roster under contract next season. And I will put an asterisk next to this because if they're able to move out any of those contracts, if they're able to move out a Ryan Graves, or if they end up trading Erik Karlsson, or, if they end up moving out Hayes, Achari, any of those guys, I think this changes a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, the Penguins have some guys on their roster that are already taking over those placeholder positions. And the more and more guys you sign, in this window of development for the Penguins, where guys like Rucker McGroarty, guys like Ville Koivunen, don't forget Philip Hallander, all of these younger guys are going to be in the mix for roster spots next season. And the more Connor Dewars, the more Connor Timmins you have on your roster, barring that they don't move anybody else, that is less room for those guys to get full-time NHL minutes, which is what some of them need at this point. I think Ville Koivunen and Rucker McGroarty, again, short sample size, but they showed enough in that sample size that warrants, a larger role at the NHL level next season. I'd argue the same for Owen Pickering. So I think there's a lot of ifs surrounding this situation, depending on the movement on the current roster. But the fact of the matter is, all these guys that already have contracts, like I said, the Kevin Hayes, the Noel Acharis, the Ryan Graves, if those guys come out of training camp and they're still on this roster, they're going to be on the roster come training camp. So it's one of those things. I think this is more of a situational thing, but if they don't, assuming they don't move out any of those contracts this summer, I think those are 2 guys that they kind of have to let walk.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, and it's one that I struggled with, especially when we really started to dig into what this offseason could and should look like for the Penguins and Kyle Dubas. And it's no disrespect to Dewar or Timmins. I think we have all said it at this point that they really surprised, and Dubas gave up nothing but a 2025 5th for both of them. And if you get 2 guys who one gives you solid bottom 6 production, one gives you some production on the blue line and does not look out of place, that's a real low price to pay for all of that. And it fits right in line with what this team wants to do, because you look at both players, they're in their mid-20s. They're not stars, but they are good pieces that can help you once you start to turn that corner. The other problem with that is once you start to turn the corner, these guys are going to be in their late 20s and early 30s. And while they won't hurt, the decline for them will begin because, again, they're not superstars. And we have seen over the past decade, 15-ish years, that superstars have started to lengthen their primes, but role players start to fall off a little bit quicker. So that could really be an issue with both players. But for now, we're going to table the conversation and keep it going. In the second segment, we'll talk about some of these younger guys that could be knocking at the door, as well as a couple of draft prospects that Kelsey has been looking at over at the Hockey News, because we know where the Penguins are right now, and that means we've got to look to the future. And we will do all that when we come back. So stick with us. We'll get into that conversation right after this. But first, we've got to tell you about today's sponsor, and that is FanDuel. The NBA playoffs, they're in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, especially if you're watching Knicks Pacers, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel, it makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and right after. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Which players are going to show up in the biggest moments, whether it's Halliburton or whoever else on the Indiana Pacers, you can track them, and that can help you build your next bet. If you've got a read on a player who's heating up, why not back that up with a same-game parlay? New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back into the Thursday edition of Locked On Penguins. I'm Patrick Damp alongside Hunter Hodes and our good friend from the Hockey News, Kelsey Surmacz. So let's keep this discussion going here because, Kelsey, I want to give this right off to you right away. The topic of the article that you wrote, which we have referenced in the first segment, is basically that they can let Timmins and Dewar walk because they've got a lot of young players knocking at the door. The question I pose to you, obviously we know the big ones. We know Rutger McGroarty. We know Ville Koivunen. But who else are you looking at specifically that you think is ready to take that jump? I get the feeling it's a lot of the players we've already talked about, but it's always good to get a third voice in here outside of just Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
All right. Well, I can start on the blue line. So I mentioned Owen Pickering before. I think when he first came up last season to the NHL level, I don't think that's a call of anybody was expecting necessarily when it happened. But he did, show that he was capable of kind of even slotting on that second pairing. Showed some good capability there. I think his play started to fall off a little bit towards the end of his stint. You saw it was starting to become a little bit overwhelming for him. He went down to Wilkes-Barre. He actually struggled for a bit, but then he started to find his game again. And I think what we're seeing from Owen Pickering is, I would argue he's kind of starting to mold himself more into a shutdown role. I'd like to see how that develops in his game as he continues to develop, but a larger role in the NHL roster, especially given the, bleak assessment of the left side of the Penguins defense right now. He should be a part of this roster next season in a full-time capacity, I think. Harrison Brunick is another one, and Dubas specifically pointed to Brunick in his presser, in his postseason presser. Brunick got that small sample size again in Wilkes-Barre Scranton for their playoff run and about 10 games at the end of the season. The beginning of that run, we saw some mistakes. We saw maybe some overzealousness from, Brunick trying to do a little bit too much on his own, because if you aren't aware, Kamloops is a terrible team. Brunick was doing pretty much everything himself there. And, while that's a good thing, sometimes that can kind of have a reverse effect too, because we saw that in his first, handful of games with Wilkes-Barre where he was just trying to do too much. Once he kind of settled in, it was more the Brunick we saw in training camp last season. I don't personally think there's anything left for him to prove in juniors. I'd love to see him get at least, that 9-game trial run at the NHL level next season. We'll see. But he's kind of a wild card. I think it depends a lot on what happens with Carlson, too. And then Jack St. Ivany is another name that was brought up by Dubas. He actually, he was injured for a lot of last season. Right after the Penguins sent him back down to Wilkes-Barre, he ended up missing almost 2 months. So he kind of had to come back from an injury, started to play again well towards the end of the season. And I still think he's, a seventh option, 6th, 7th option for the Penguins potentially. So that's the blue line, but up front, you mentioned Rucker McGroarty, Ville Koivunen. I'm not going to go into those guys too much. We've seen that they very much appear to be NHL ready. Obviously, I think, some of the guys we saw, and now Vasily Ponomarev's one of them. I'd love to see Tristan Brose maybe get a crack at some point next season. He was another guy that missed 2 months of Wilkes-Barre's season because he had mono, but he came back, pretty much picked up right where he left off. So those are 2 guys, but the guy I'm really, really fascinated about, and I mentioned him earlier, is Philip Hallander. Because I think he's kind of flying under the radar for a lot of people. If people don't know, he was just named the Swedish Hockey League's Forward of the Year. So he had a really good season over in the SHL. Obviously re-signed by the Penguins to a 2-year contract. I think he's going to get NHL minutes. I think he's going to occupy, one of those bottom 6 spots. And I think he can be an impact forward for the Penguins. He has good two-way potential. He plays a really hard-nosed game down low. He has decent size. He's pretty physical. So I'd like to see what Hallander can bring, because I think he's kind of a name that not a whole lot of people were talking about.
Yeah, Pat and I have really talked about Hallander for the last couple of weeks, ever since the Penguins brought him back, and he's going to have a legit chance to make this team out of camp, and I think he's probably going to iron out one of the spots. He'll probably be in the bottom 6 somewhere. I'm excited to see how he does in the NHL, if he does make it, of course, because he was really good this past year in Sweden. He was really good last year too. Honestly, ever since he went over there, he worked on a couple parts of his game, and he turned into an even better offensive player. His production was fairly decent in Wilkes-Barre, but it blossomed even more overseas in Sweden. I'm excited to see if he can bring those elements back to North America and the Pittsburgh Penguins. I agree with you about Pickering. Pat and I recently discussed him and how we think he's probably going to get a roster spot out of camp. But this also goes back to even more discussion about the blue line, because you guys were talking about Timmins and how if he walks, then there's potentially another slot to fill, even if Harrison Brunick isn't ready, just because if you trade Carlson, which I think Pat and I expect to happen at this rate, you then have 2 spots open on the right side, and then at least 1, if not 2, open on the left side. So you're going to have to be really even more aggressive in terms of really reshaping the blue line. And this is probably not going to be a 1-year thing. It's probably going to take multiple years to really get the blue line that you want until you're ready to start contending again. Because, again, all due respect to Chris Letang, we both love the guy. Kelsey, I know you're a big fan of Letang too. He can't handle the top pairing minutes anymore. So if you do let Timmins go and you don't re-sign him, even though he's an RFA, you're going to have to replace him somehow, some way. And Brunick, I like him a lot. He was very close to making this team last year. If he can have a training camp like that again, if not a little bit better, he will have a legit shot to get the 9-game tryout. But still, we have to see if that happens. I think the best case is probably you get someone to play those minutes. And if Brunick, again, blows you away at camp in the preseason, that'd be great. And you can try him out for a few games. But this still goes with the notion that there's going to be, I think, a lot of changes to this blue line coming this summer and then probably next year as well. But I agree with all the other names that Kelsey mentioned as well.
Absolutely. And real quickly, I don't want you to spoil it, Kelsey, because I want people to click on your article and actually read it rather than us just spoil the whole thing here. You dropped another draft prospect profile today for forward Justin Carbonneau. And I read this not long after you dropped it because I've got the alerts on, and I do so many productive things with my time. But this is a player that wasn't really on my radar, but after reading it, after looking at some of the highlights, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, and I wanna throw out Jesse Marshall's name here. I'm a friend of both of us. He actually appeared on my podcast Pucks and Ad a couple weeks ago, and he had a glowing endorsement of Carbonneau, and it kind of made me look further into it because he wasn't somebody that was necessarily on my radar either. But this guy has a lot of skill. And Jesse even said this too. He said, aside from the top three guys in this draft, he might be the most like raw skilled player in this crop of players that the Penguins could potentially select. He can dangle for days. He's got great hands. He's got great speed too. He's great in transition. So there's a lot of things to like about Carbonneau's game. And he's also been working on, rounding out some of the aspects of his two-way game and the defensive details. There's still a little bit of work to do there, I think. But I mean, from what I've seen, this would be a legitimate, selection for the Penguins, as is, I think, a lot of guys in the same area. I've talked about Jake O'Brien a lot. I'm very high on Jake O'Brien. I like Kayshawn Aitchison a lot, and that's another guy that Jesse and I discussed quite a bit. But I think regardless of what happens, there is going to be a few guys that drop to that 11 slot. We see it happen every year. I wrote about Brady Martin as well, but Brady Martin's draft stock is rising. I highly doubt he's going to be available at 11, but that's going to push some guys back, possibly even Victor Eklund. So, between you got Carbonneau, you got O'Brien, you got Aitchison, possibly Eklund, I think there is going to be a pretty good player for the Penguins to draft in that slot. But Carbonneau's one of them, and he's just like you said, he wasn't really on my radar either, but once Jesse brought up his name, I had to look into it. And if you haven't checked out Justin Carbonneau highlights, I think you should. He's got a motor. He can kind of exploit defenses. He can get to those danger areas. He, has a little bit of a scoring touch too. So check out Justin Carbonneau highlights. You won't be disappointed.
All I'll say is this: if Victor Eklund somehow falls to 11, I would just sprint to the stage right away. He's like on my dream list now that the pick is 11, but there is a legit shot that he falls to 11. I agree with you about Carbonneau, though. I have him a bit below some of my other players on my board right now, below Eklund. O'Brien, I have ahead of him. Aitchison, who I don't like making a lot of comps, but if I had to, he's kind of like a hybrid version of Brian Rafalski and Nick Cromwell, especially with how physical he can be along the boards. I know some people are concerned that his offense won't translate to the NHL, which is fair just because he's doing this in junior, but his all-around two-way game is spectacular to watch. And I'll throw Ben Kindle out there as well. I think at 11, I think he'd also be a really good pick. But Carbonneau, 100%. I'm glad that you threw his name in there because he's also going to be right around that range for the Penguins. I have him again below a few of those guys, but if he were the pick, I'd be totally happy about it. Don't worry, Pat. I'm going to drop my big board in the next probably couple of weeks on one of these episodes. I'm almost done with it.
That big board, it's coming just as soon as the next Guns N' Roses album, people. It's a day away from being a day away. I kid.
Well, we have to see if they're going to make a new album. They just tour all the time now.
But Kyle, if you're listening and Victor Eklund is available and you want to get our own Hunter Hodes here some cardio, go ahead and take him so Hunter can get his sprints in and get himself into shape. That is going to do it for this second segment. As I said, go to the Hockey News, read Kelsey's article about Carbonneau. It is a fantastic read, and that will do it for this segment. When we come back, we've got one more young player to talk about, as well as clue everybody in to a new segment that Hunter and I will be debuting tomorrow. So stick around for that. We will do that when we come back right after this. Back here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Penguins, I'm Patrick Damp, right alongside Hunter Hodes and Kelsey Surmacz. So we have been talking about the future of the Penguins, whether it's RFAs, potential draft picks, players who are already in the system that we're looking forward to. But there is one name that has come up on the trade market and the offer sheet market. And if we're going to talk about sprinting towards something, if this player is available for offer sheet or trade, Kyle, sprint to that phone, sprint to that Word document and make it happen. And that is Minnesota Wild center Marco Rossi. Absolutely incredible numbers the last 2 years. He has hit the even 100-point mark over the last 2 seasons. He has scored 45 goals, 55 assists for 100 points combined the last 2 seasons. He is all of 23. He will be 24 when the season begins. But I pose this question to the both of you. Kelsey, I will send it to you first. If this player is available, what is realistic and what would you want to see the Penguins give up to get him? If it's not an offer sheet, if it's a trade, what would you be willing to trade for him?
Well, it kind of poses the question about what the Wild are looking for in a return, because you think about the Minnesota Wild and they need center depth, so it just seems very odd that they're willing to deal Rossi. I think that seems to be more of a philosophy thing. I don't want to speak on something because I don't know. This is just me spitballing, but he's a little undersized. He's 5'9", but he's a good player and he's shown that. But he was playing, fourth line center in the playoffs for the Wild this season. And he saw his minutes start to dwindle towards the end there. So you got to wonder what is amiss there and what they're looking for in a return, because if they don't value Rossi as a center, you'd think that they want a center in return, but maybe not. You might be able to create a package around another piece that could work for them. They need offense. They need offensive players. And I think they kind of need higher end, prospects, just the NHL ready prospects in their system too, especially on the forward front. They have a lot of defensive depth. So I wouldn't count on defensive depth, but I think this is definitely a player on the Penguins end that you give up a first round pick for. I mean, this is somebody, we talk about that Rangers conditional first round pick. We don't know what's going to happen with that yet. We may not know until 48 hours before the draft. I think we'll know sooner than that, but you never know. If the Penguins do get that 12th overall pick for the Rangers, that's a pick that I send for Marco Rossi, in addition to a prospect / current roster player. I've this is a tough one because, to be honest, I'm not sure that the Penguins have the assets that the Wild would be looking for. And that's just kind of what I'm stuck on, because when I look at the Penguins prospect pool, the best center prospect in their system right now, that's closest to being NHL ready, is Tristan Brose. And I don't think Tristan Brose in a first necessarily gets this done. So, you might have to throw in something else there, whether that's another pick, whether that's a rostered player. It might get a little bit hairy there, but I think you have to think about the centerpiece of this trade. And I don't know that the Penguins have that, but I mean, if they're looking for offensive players, I know they're not young, but I wouldn't discount the possibility of a Brian Rust or Rickard Rakell going there just because they need offense. I mean, this is a team that just needs to inject more offense into its attack anyway. And they're veterans. They're not centers. Rakell can play center. We saw that was a little bit of an experiment this season that didn't exactly go super swimmingly for the Penguins. But, if they need offense, they can look to create a package around those guys, maybe send that first with that. But to be honest, I'm just not sure that they have the return that the Wild would be looking for, but I definitely send that first. That's somebody that you trade a first round pick for.
Yeah, especially if they also can get, say a first back. Even if they trade Rakell somewhere else this summer and you get a first back as part of that package, you can maybe dangle that first round pick plus more. But as you said, Kelsey, they don't have a true forward prospect or even a center prospect that I think Minnesota would really be all over the moon for. The prospect system for the Penguins, it's better, but it's nowhere near, top 10, top 12 in the league. They're trying to get it to that point, but it's still nowhere near it right now. This is still very much a work in progress. That said, if this price isn't astronomically high or anything like that, you still need to be in on this. This is someone who can help you not just right now, but well into the future. He had the best season of his career this past season, 24 goals, 60 points in 82 games. As Pat said, he has 100 points in his last 2 seasons. He's a left shot center, can play up and down your lineup. I mean, Penguins already have Tommy Novak coming back to be their third line center next season. If you wanted to bump him to wing for example. You can put Marco Rossi as your third line center. That's totally fine. Heck, if you want to go your top four of Crosby, Malkin, Novak, Rossi, you can do that as well. You can even experiment Malkin to playing at wing at times next season if you want to do that, with move Novak up to the second line and put Marco Rossi on the third line. That they will have no shortage of options if they were to go and get Marco Rossi. The underlying numbers are very good for this past season. Plus 13 goal differential at 5-on-5, 53% expected goal share, 51% scoring chances for rate. This is a player who I would be all over in a, trade and sign scenario. I don't think this is going to be an offer sheet situation. Excuse me. I just don't think they're going to pony up the draft picks to do that. I just don't think they are in a position in their rebuild on the fly right now to kind of do that, because you look at the money he made this past season, guys, only $863,334. He is going to get a pretty big payday in this next contract as an RFA, no matter what. And with that, again, the higher the money is with the tiers, the more you have to give up for an offer sheet. And I just don't see the Penguins doing that right now. This is very much, to me, trade for him and then you sign him to a long-term contract. So I would be very much in on him, but as Kelsey said, some teams might be able to offer more for a player like this. But still, if Penguins were to get him, I'd be over the moon.
Absolutely. The two quick things I will say on this, because I'm pretty much in agreement with everything that you guys said, is one, I don't think you need to give up the sun and the moon. And when I say that, I mean, they're going to ask for that. You don't have to go for that. He's not that much of a need. I would love him to be a Penguin. He's right in that wheelhouse of what they're looking to get and what they're trying to do in this era of Penguins hockey. At the same time, though, you bring up how much Minnesota's in need of offense. Kelsey, you brought up Brian Rust. You brought up Rickard Rakell. Those guys are luxuries for the Penguins right now. I love both of them. I would love to see them continue to be Penguins, but if we want to talk about this team getting back to contention sooner rather than later, wouldn't hurt to part with them, especially if that's what you get in return. You also have to bring up that we've got a ton of picks over the next few years. This is a guy who it's worth giving up picks for, because he will be part of your team for the foreseeable future. So you're essentially just getting a guy who is NHL ready and might as well be an early first round pick. But at the end of the day, if the opportunity is there, Kyle Dubas absolutely should take it. Before we go, I teased it at the end of the second segment. Hunter and I are debuting a new Friday segment that we will do each week throughout the off season, and we are calling it Fan Take Friday. What we will do after our Thursday episodes, once we upload them, we will put a post up on YouTube. We will put a post out on our Twitter account, and we're going to ask you, the faithful Locked On Penguins listener community, what's your hottest take? What's a take you think makes sense? What's a historical what if? Doesn't matter. If you've got a take about the Pittsburgh Penguins, send it our way. This is not like a mailbag. You don't have to ask a question. You can just throw your take out there, and Hunter and I, and if we have a guest on Fridays, we will discuss it. We'll talk about if it's possible, if it makes sense, if it's silly. It doesn't matter. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your takes so we can discuss them every Friday during the off season. But for now, that is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Penguins. Before we go, Kelsey, let the people know where they can find you, what you're working on, and anything else you want to plug.
Yeah, so as Pat has mentioned, you can find me on the Hockey News Penguins website. You can bookmark the page, follow the page. You can get all the latest updates. I'm going to be doing a lot of draft coverage, just a lot of, stuff about the Penguins offseason and what they might be doing here. But lots of draft coverage to come, and as well as the coaching search. We've been following that pretty quickly too, or pretty religiously too, rather. And then in addition to that, I run Pucks and That, which is my podcast, so check that out. And I'm also going to be on the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live after every single playoff game. We go live, and I'll be on it tonight and tomorrow. So I'm covering some other playoff hockey games, so check that out.
Obviously, we are going to be following all of that because we are total hockey sickos here on Locked On Penguins. But again, that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Penguins. For Hunter Hodes, for Kelsey Surmacz, I am Patrick Damp. Thank you as always for tuning in. Send us your hot takes once we put the post out, and we will discuss them on our Friday episode. But for now, thanks again for listening. We'll be back on Friday.